One thing I wanted to touch on here is, so because you guys are reaching out to these bigger institutions and businesses, I'm sure one of their questions relate to the regulatory compliance and know your customer requirements and all those types of things. How does the XDC network address those type of things? And to I mean, what are you doing to make sure that your customers are comfortable as far as compliance, regulatory requirements?
I love that you bring that up, because the biggest aspect of regulatory compliance is making sure that the people that you're trading with are compliant. So the biggest thing that we would like to sort of like reassure when people are coming onto the XCC network is that you're not coming onto a network and just sort of abstractly trying to apply, random compliance measures. The people you engage with are regulatory compliant, whether they're regulatory compliant in Europe, Singapore, India, wherever they are. The biggest thing is the people or the applications that are on chain, the applications that you can engage with, operate by whatever level of compliance that's necessary. And the reason I say that is the biggest problem with crypto, which is arguably the best thing about crypto, is anybody can do anything. Anybody can do it. So I can create a token, you can create a token, da, da, da. But the thing is if you have a network full of regulatory non-compliant assets that are essentially just lofty-docky, floaty speculator tokens, it becomes relatively difficult to get new businesses in there because they're not necessarily sure who they can engage with and who they can. But being able to have a set of applications on chain that are already abiding by compliance standards, it makes it a lot easier for those businesses to come on chain and know who they're dealing with.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, back to what you were saying before, taking that old and get it to the new. So the regulations over here in this world, now we're just having that we're mixing that into the code or the protocol of what they can engage with. And that's the compliancy.
Yeah. So making sure, and we say this because we have different organizations abiding by European MiCA compliance. We have stable coins abiding by Euro standard compliance or USD standard compliance. We have different organizations that actually, XDC was the first network to create an NFT that was a representation of a security, as well as being able to have tokenized treasuries in the form of, or stable coins backed by tokenized treasuries. And all of these are all under the guise of compliance based off those different organizations that are abiding by them. And then as new organizations come onto the network and see that, they feel a lot more comfortable with engaging with these assets and engaging with these technologies versus, ApeCoin that got launched last week with some random DeFi protocol. You know what I mean? It's about building trust. And part of that trust comes from having partners on chain that are also abiding by standards that they deem valuable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's necessary, right? You got to. It's got to be there. It's got to be in play.
You got to make it easy. Yeah, it has to be easy.
Got to make it easy. That's the only way.
I got burning questions.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know we got you for 20 more minutes, and so I know a lot of our listeners are XRP holders. There's a lot of Bitcoin people, XLM, XDC. I'm wondering, so the technical question or the created question is, well, what trends do you see shaping the future of blockchain technology in the next 5 to 10 years? But I want to expand on what role do you see these key, what they call ISO 2022 tokens, coins? How do you see all of this playing out in the future to interoperate together? Because we know it's not just going to be one chain to rule them all. There's going to need to be some collaboration and interoperability, and it's clear that the XDC network is working towards that. And so I just wonder, as a expert in this field, where do you see things going with all of this?
So I see this from both the developer side, but also from a business side. It seems like the networks are going to be domain specific or almost industry specific. A lot of people sort of look at their network as like the general network. It's going to do everything on it. And they sort of criticize networks like, oh, I don't see this on it. But really what's going to happen is these networks are going to be very specialized for a very specific type of activity. And each network is going to have a specific type of activity that people go to that network for. So let's say, for example, like XRP is cross-border remittance. Let's say for XDC is automated trade finance and being able to create automated debt contracts. Let's say for another network, it's GameFi, different games are sort of there. Another network, it's supply chain. Whatever it is, a lot of these networks are going to be domain specific. And I say that because there are a lot of different applications that can operate within that domain. And those applications overlap with each other in terms of whether it's finding liquidity, in terms of whether it's trading. Because if you have one network with a supply chain application on it, it'd be very beneficial for all the other supply chain applications to connect with those other supply chain applications versus trying to jump through network to network for different types of engagement. Same thing with cross-border remittance, same thing with trade finance. So I think the biggest thing that you're going to end up seeing, and I see this too, like I say this from a developer perspective, because when I see different developers, part of the reason why they go to different networks is because they see people building those specific things and they can see that their applications can interact with those things as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that each network is going to be like this walled garden only doing one thing, but it is going to mean that when people go to different networks, they may not just go to one, they will go to one for this reason, one for this reason, one for this reason. And the reason why I brought up the bridges and the stable coins is a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, I create a tokenized asset and move it to a bridge over here. That's not typically what's going to happen. It's going to be capital from one network moving on to another network to engage with another type of activity. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's that's already there though. I mean, we're already seeing that big time in the stablecoin community. I mean, first it was Tether, and then you have USDC, but now they're on different chains. You go onto any exchange right now. If you're buying, you can have that. You can have that stable coin on that chain, on that network, right? That's totally a thing. Absolutely. Yeah. That's and you got to have that because it's like you're saying. And I totally see that. You're doing business over here. Okay, cool. You got your liquidity in this stable coin, but it's on that network. Okay, cool. We need the bridge. We need to switch it up. We do that. We do the crossover. Boom. We're onto that network, doing that thing, doing that business, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that is key. I think that is key because everyone thinks their network is is the network, but it should be the network for this thing, right? And that's what I see. Because what ended up happening when you start looking at it that way, instead of looking at 20,000, crypto networks or the top 100 crypto networks all competing with each other, you only really find you find these clusters, and you might find 5 or 6 networks competing for this specific activity, and 5 or 6 networks competing for this specific activity, and they're all not competing with each other for the same thing because people go to those networks and people build different things on those networks for different things or for different reasons, and people will go to them for those reasons, and they tend to be a lot different. Primarily, like I said, domain or industry specific. And then those applications will interact with each other. Like I said, whether if it's a supply chain application, it'd be great to interact with other supply chain apps. If you're cross-border remittance, well, every country has applications operating in cross-border remittance. You want to be able to have a network and engage with everybody in that. It's being able to find that domain and then be able to find that specific industry to be able to satisfy that type of service. And then that's really the thing with business. That's really what I see now is that businesses are going to go, okay, we're going to go to this network for this. We're going to go to this network for that. And we're going to mostly focus on that because everyone seems to think that they think that the business is going to choose one network and that's it. BlackRock chose our network. We won, guys. We won. BlackRock chose us. We won. We won. And it's like, no, like
y'all can eat it, bro.
Yeah. And it's like they're there for a specific activity. They'll go to another network for another specific activity. They'll go to another network for another type of activity. And it's really what ends up happening is, are you guys familiar with the Metcalfe effect or Metcalfe's law?
Yes.
Oh, you talked about I remember you talking
about the networking effect.
Tell our audience a little bit about that. Can you expand on it for the audience?
So in a network, each additional participant creates an exponential amount of connections. And what ends up happening is these connections aren't just general connections. They're usually focused on, you can see this with social media. Like if that was the case, there'd be one social media application, that's it. But people go to Instagram for pictures. People go to Facebook for family. People go to Twitter to yell at each other over. You go to specific applications for that specific type of engagement. You would never go to Facebook so you can, I don't know. Maybe you might tell off your uncle or something. But the same type of activity that you see on Twitter, you're not going to see on Facebook. Same activity you see on Facebook, you're not going to see on Tumblr or 4chan, right? They have a very specific type of activity, and the people that come onto those applications engage in a specific way. Same thing when it comes to these blockchains. So that's a good way to look at it.
No, that's great. That's great analogy. That just shows, but that just shows that's a digital representation of human behavior overall, right? Right. Even down to the everyday working bee. Where do you shop? Why do you shop there? Well, because there's nowhere else. But if there was somewhere else, where would you go? I'd probably go over here. Why? Because of XYZ. Same, right?
Exactly.
Comes back down to human behavior. Oh,
No, I love that you put it that way. Because yeah, there isn't just one. And technically, it's hard to point down one thing because you can break that one thing into other things and break those one things into other things.
Yeah.
And at a certain point,
Right.
when it gets too big, it's not one thing anymore. It's a collection of things, and
No.
those collection of things do different things. And it's good to acknowledge that because I think people look at everything as a monolith sometimes, and you have to remember that there's a lot of things going on all at the same time. Like I see this a lot because people focus a lot on the layer ones, but don't necessarily focus on the applications that people are launching on these layer ones, and that's essentially what's going to essentially bring the value. You know.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Yes.
That's the value. And
That's
and we've
value.
talked about this before on the show and as well as in the private Quincy. Value never equals price, or price never eats value. The value is far more worth than the price. Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Always.
what you end up
Always, because
seeing is the value is abstract, and people, you know what price discovery is? This is this idea of price discovery. There's this notion of where the market doesn't really know how to value something yet, and there's this ongoing idea. That's why the price is volatile. It's like, is it overpriced? Is it underpriced? So value is incredibly abstract. And the more people that engage with it, the more clear it becomes. But it's hard to tell what that is until that's like I mean maybe it seems obvious now, but when people like when Facebook first came up, people are like, "What's the point of Facebook?" I can just
Yeah.
like what? What's the point? And that's
What are we
the thing because
supposed to do?
it was an
That's
abstract
the
idea. What are you supposed to? Now it's obvious. Oh, I can interact with my friends, get my friends, blah, 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 blah. But
Show my
it's hard to be able
grandbaby.
to. It's hard to be able to see what that. And don't get me wrong, people may value Facebook as a company a certain way. People may value the notion of going on social media a certain way. But the biggest thing is it's just that the value proposition is abstract, and it takes a while for people to start realizing what that is. And when people start going into price is essentially the set idea on what I'm willing to give up for this proposition.
right,
And that's
right, right. Price is
constantly
price.
ongoing in terms of being debated on how much is this worth? How much does this cost? Is this worth what it's cost? Am I able to? It's just, there's a huge. It's entirely flexible. But the biggest thing is
Yeah.
the cost will almost never reach the value. If it did, you'd see markets do this.
Yeah.
They go up, and then
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The cost never equals the value. It's so abstract, and then it goes vice versa. It may be overvalued, and it comes down like this again. So it's really hard to
Yeah.
be able to see what value is from an abstract sense. So you have this
Right.
price discovery of constantly being able to find where that is.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. I always use the hammer analogy. I can go down to the hardware store right now. I can pick up a hammer, $10, right? But what I use for that hammer, utility, right? That hammer is making me dollars all day, every day, but it only cost me $10. So how much is the hammer really worth? Well, initially $10, and what I can do with it thereafter is where the real value is, but it's
And
not
then
related to the price.
And then a beautiful thing about that is because you may go, well, if it's so valuable, why is the hammer only worth $10? Well, guess what? If a lot of people also started doing what you're doing, there's more demand for the hammer, which means you see what I mean? There's an element of being
Yeah.
able to
Yep.
materialize the value of the hammer because other people
Yep.
are able to expand that value in terms of what they're doing as well. That's the utility component.
Yep.
So there's
Yep.
the abstract value of what you're able to do with it, but then there's the abstract sense of having a bunch of people all come together and also realize that and then demand that thing that was able to create that means for value in the first place. It's a perfect example. Like I
Yep.
think a good example of that could also be like when you see a plot of land. What's the value of a plot of land? Well, you could put a home there, you can build a building there, you can create a well. There's a lot of different things. But then once that thing is there, the value of that has changed now. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So it's one of those things
Yep.
where things are always constantly in a sort of change. And it's always hard to be
Yes.
able to judge the value of something. And that's the thing. What's the potential value of that land? Because if you sat there and said this land's worthless, but then someone goes, hey, look, man, there's a bunch of oil under that land. The value of this could be insane. Who knows? And maybe we don't know how much oil is under there, but there's a potential component as well. So
Right.
it's always
Right.
abstract in terms of being able to see what value is and what can materialize as, and then what the expense is to be able to do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well put.
Absolutely.
Well put, man.
Yeah.
Hey, a little message here from Trini. He says, what up? Just made it here. Quincy, take a breath and have a drink.
Oh man, the classic. Yeah, that's the classic line. Oh yeah, Quincy,
I
slow
know.
down. Or so yeah, I'm all with it though. I love it. I love it.
Welcome, Amy
Oh.
Adams. Thank you for coming to the Dip a Toe show. And our good friend Wilma, Miss Crypto Nurse. She says hello, Quincy.
Oh Wilma, hi. She was so
Yeah.
nice at Vegas.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a sweetheart, and her sister too. Awesome.
And
Awesome.
Yeah.
our friend
that was a good
and
time.
our friend Heather Lee has stopped by. So we only have a few minutes left. Where do you see all this going? So you are intimately involved in all of the different things that are being built, and I'm sure your friends and people that are building things in based on your conversations with the the different businesses and institutions that you're talking with on a regular basis. How close are we before all this stuff is coming together? What's your what are your thoughts? Are you thinking 5, 10 years? I mean,
Let's reframe how we look at this. Let's look
when
at it.
moon, Quincy? When
Let's
moon?
look at this. Let's look at this like AI, right? Because people go, oh my, like when people so when we look at AI, we think of the singularity, right? We don't think, oh, what's AI going to be in 10 years? We go, when's the day AI is just going to change the paradigm, and we just don't even know what we're going to do anymore. And I say that because the reason I say that is not because things are just so exponential, but in which they are. But the biggest thing is, uh, it's not about this linear path of when things are growing. It's what are the things that are changing the game. So let's look at it. Let's take a step back. So if AI is the future, let's look at the past for a second. What was the previous thing that essentially created a paradigm shift? Well, look at Facebook, for instance, right? There was this notion of if you ask somebody in 2004, when is social media going to be the thing? Well, there's this notion of, well, where's the paradigm shift? Facebook existing is one paradigm shift. TikTok existing is another paradigm shift. And I say that because when Facebook came out, monetization online isn't really a thing. When TikTok came out, that was the new monetization platform for all the new influencers. These are different paradigms to look at. But if we were going to say when is social media going to be the biggest thing, I could have been in 2004 saying it is the biggest thing. Facebook's here. Do you see this? We can interact online. We can do all this, but it's not the same thing as influencers being on YouTube or being on TikTok making money from content that they're curating. That's not something that existed back then. But that's not something that people could have comprehended back then. They just comprehended being able to friend grandma online. You know what I mean? So there are these paradigm shifts that we should be looking at in terms of how people are able to interact online and how people are able to interact with each other. So it's not so much of a 5-10 year thing. I think we should be looking for the next paradigm and not just a trend like NFTs or ICOs. What are tangible things that we're able to see that are able to change the game? I think we saw that originally. So if Facebook was the first paradigm for social media, we could look at Bitcoin as that for the first paradigm. And that was just being able to send money over the internet. Boom. That was the thing. Boom. No smart contracts, no nothing. But then let's say smart contracts are the next paradigm. Now you can create automated code on top. You can create code that automates different tasks on chain on top of move money. That's another paradigm. But maybe that paradigm's not it's not what's it called? Sufficient enough for us to be able to see how valuable it is.
We
can see the same thing with social media.
Exponential.
Now, let's say in social media, we're able to see the value of interacting online, but when did people start being able to monetize? Well, I think that was YouTube's partner program in maybe 2010, maybe 2012. And then after that, everyone monetized. Twitter monetizes, TikTok monetizes, everything monetizes now, but that's a paradigm shift. So if I was back in 2004 or back in 2008 or whatever, trying to say, well, when's the next whatever, one, it'd be really difficult to see where the next paradigm would be, because how am I supposed to guess that monetization online is going to be the biggest thing? Or even online media now. People get more of their news online than they do from TV. These are different paradigm shifts. So I think we should be looking at these things in terms of paradigm shifts, in terms of how people are able to utilize these technologies to move forward. It's harder. I say that it's a little bit harder to do that, but it's easier to see because we say that with AI. We don't go, what's AI going to be in 10 years? It's like, well, if AI shifts tomorrow, what's AI going to be next week? You know what I mean? That's how we should be looking at it.
Yeah.
Well said.
Wow. Well, the other thing is I mean, we're transforming our banking system, right? From the old to the new. That's something that that I think is well down the road.
Want to hear my opinion on that? I do think I call it out. There's an idea that I have, right? I'll call it an idea because I think it's a good one. But there's this construct that I have as the Alpha Company or the Alpha Corporation. Now, what is this, right? Well, everyone likes to go, oh, we're going to be tokenizing these assets. These banks are going to be doing this, blah blah blah. What we tend to see, and I've noticed this with other paradigm shifts, this always happens. So you have the establishment, right? People that have already been doing it. Now, before that with Facebook, that might have been the traditional cable media or something. Before social media saturation, that might have been whatever the previous thing would have been. And the reason I say this is what happens is you see a new person come into the space that didn't exist in the space before. They change the space based off an innovation that they have, and now the space is entirely different. Now, I say that because a lot of people are waiting. They're sitting back and they're going, where are the banks? Where are the banks? I don't see them. I want to see them on chain. Where are they? I actually end up talking to a lot of these too. But what I end up seeing too is when I talk to a lot of other businesses, whether it's startups, I'm like, look, what may end up happening is you might end up seeing, and this is what I call Alpha Company, a startup or a small organization or a small company, whatever. And it doesn't mean, when I mean small, I mean smaller than everybody else that's already in here significantly. And you see that with AI.
Right. New kid on the block.
OpenAI came out of nowhere. There's Facebook, there's Google, there's Microsoft, but then OpenAI with a grant of like $50 million is now this giant AI company, right? So I think there's going to be this alpha company in blockchain where you're going to start seeing essentially the first steps into what you would see with tokenizing assets within banks. But it's going to be the small organization, probably with less than a dozen employees, being able to outcompete like JP Morgan and Chase, being able to outcompete Merrill Lynch, being able to outcompete Goldman Sachs. And that's what gets them, that's what kicks them in. Because that's the thing, we saw with AI, OpenAI comes out, now everyone and their mother has got an AI. Everyone and their mother's trying to do with something they did. But it was a small organization that essentially did it first. And I think that's what's going to happen. You're going to see a small organization pop up. They're going to change the game. They're going to be very competitive for really, really cheap. And they'll be really, really small in comparison. And the big ones won't be able to compete. Or at the very least, they won't be able to compete without changing their technology to be like I said, with everyone now being on AI, how are you supposed to compete with AI if you don't have AI? And I think that's what's going to happen with blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. No, facts. Yeah, I call that the Amazon effect, because in the dot coms, right? It was an old school way of ICOs, right? And then Amazon came out of left field. It's like, oh man, we just sell books. We ain't nobody. That's all we do. And it's like
y'all ain't nobody at the time.
Y'all ain't gonna sell books. We sell books. Yeah.
And that's the thing, there were booksellers. There was literally like Borders and Barnes and Nobles, and they're like, that thing. And then not only that, so I love that you bring that up, because there's two sides to it. One, there's the paradigm shift of being able to do something better, but then there's the lateral shift to be able to do it in other domains. So not only did they conquer books, they conquered everything in terms of you can ship online. And I think that's what we're going to see in terms of tokenization. You might see the tokenization of bonds or securities or whatever, but then you're also seeing the tokenization of everything that can be traded online. Because the biggest thing is there's this vertical shift in terms of being able to break the paradigm, but then there's the lateral shift in terms of being able to take that paradigm and put it into other domains.
Everything, right? Yep. Like this, do one and then catch them all.
Yep.